Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast, where we are all about encouraging and equipping local church leaders to be disciples who make disciples. With your hosts, Mark Gainey and Andy Frazier. In each episode, Andy and Mark have authentic conversations that help you grow as you lead the local church. Thanks for joining the podcast, and be sure to subscribe to the show. Here is today's episode.
Welcome in to this episode of the Church Leadership Podcast. Andy and I are thrilled to have you along, to have you watching or listening. And every single episode, our mission here at the Church Leadership Podcast is to encourage and equip leaders in the local church to be disciples and make disciples. And so today's episode is no exception. And I'm excited. I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited about the topic that we're going to talk about today. So Andy, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss.
All right, Mark. So good to be here with you today and to talk about something that I think you and I are really going to enjoy discussing today. And the reason I say enjoy, the word joy is the word enjoy there. So we want to talk a little bit about
See
joy
what you did
today. Yeah. Realistically, we should have great joy in serving Jesus in the local church. We should, no matter our context, no matter our role, no matter our experience or education, or no matter our resources, we should find great joy in serving Jesus in the local church. It doesn't matter if we're a one-talent church or a five-talent church, according to that parable. We want to be faithful with what God has given us and steward that well. But listen, we want to find joy, and the first place we find that joy, obviously, is in knowing and loving Jesus. But we want to find joy in ministry, and sometimes we don't have that. So sometimes we let all of our circumstances and surroundings and relationships kind of just suck the life and the joy out of us. And sometimes we're looking for the next big thing to bring us joy. So Mark, how do we kind of regulate that? How do we have that steady, persistent, underlying joy in ministry when we're serving the Lord?
That's huge. That is huge. Because if you're watching or listening and you're in ministry, if you're a church leader, lay leader, staff member, pastor, I'm pretty confident that you have had this struggle because, like Andy said, we all have. There are days we wake up and we're so excited. We're excited to get to the office. We're excited to make those phone calls. And then there are other days when we get up and we're like, do I really have to do this? And we were talking with a group of pastors this morning. There are those days where we like, let me see what job opportunities there are because we're ready to exit, right? And so it's key. How do we maintain that joy? And Andy, you said it best. It has to be found in the Lord. But practically speaking, if you're in that spot where you're like, where's the joy? Where's the fun? Where's the enjoyment of this? You've been serving and you have been faithful to serve, but man, you're discouraged. Just one practical way, I think, that works, that we have found, Andy and I have found together, that you can find joy in small wins. Andy mentioned that so often we look for that next big thing. And I'm going to be honest, Andy, I have done that for a long time. For a lot of years in ministry, that's what I looked toward. Okay, we had a big Sunday, right? Oh, we had so many baptisms, or we had so many people show up, or, we multiplied small groups today, or whatever, right? And these major things. When in fact, we had so many small wins that led up to those major wins that I completely ignored and that I didn't celebrate, that I didn't notice, that I didn't take time to think about. And then fast forward 6 months and I'm longing for that next big thing. Like, oh man, we haven't baptized that many people in years, right? Why? And what I have failed to do is to take joy in those small wins that often lead to big wins, but they lead to major change and transition and transformation. And I've just missed it, Andy.
Yeah, man, we tend to associate our identity and our joy in what we do, rather than what Jesus has done for us first and foremost. And when we do that, we miss out on so much. You know, that whole there's joy in the journey thing. I mean, there's so much
Mm,
truth in that. We look at the destination as what's going to bring us joy, but Jesus is along with us on this journey. And there are so many things he wants to teach us, so many things that we can celebrate, and so many things that we can be happy about. But man, uh, if we're looking for all the big things to satisfy us and fulfill us and bring us joy, we're looking in the wrong place. I mean,
yep.
that event with all those people bringing in all that money. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world to happen in your church. Those are good things, but there's a whole lot of things that we may be missing out on. And Mark, let's talk a little bit about just the culture of joy in our churches, how we can kind of foster and celebrate a culture, and how our people learn better. They're more receptive, and how uh, just the overall spiritual condition and ability to for people to receive what we're teaching and what we're doing is better in when the joy is present.
Absolutely. So as we're talking about, celebrating, finding joy in small wins, joy is something that's not accidental.
Mm.
It's intentional, right? It's a choice, honestly. And um, Andy and I have been introduced to a book over the last year called "The Other Half of Church." And if you're watching, I'll just that's it right there, "The Other Half of Church," and and it got us thinking. I know Andy's going to talk specifically about that, but um, it got us thinking about the culture of joys in our own churches. Um, and quite honestly, it's not something that happens by accident. It's something that you got to be really intentional about. And but you also have to be aware of it, because the whole idea of this book is that, you know, typically we teach to people who think, logically, information, and so we pass information along and all that stuff, and then we look around and we wonder why nobody's happy, why life is not changing, why hearts aren't being changed by Jesus as often as we want. And so if we're not careful, we neglect that. We neglect the culture of joy, which really creates an environment where people learn and grow much deeper. I tell this story all the time. I'm not a good grower of plants. My dad is a master gardener. I am not. He has a green thumb. I've got a black thumb. Okay. And maybe it has something to do with my yard and the soil that they used, because they, raked all the soil away and just put field dirt in there. But I can plant a fruit tree or whatever in my yard. I can guarantee you in a year it's going to be dead. I can't do it. But even in that kind of soil, I can help encourage growth, right? I can help encourage it by adding fertilizer and watering it more than I do, and, babying those plants in that first year. Well, there's a culture that we can create in our churches that also facilitates and encourages growth, and that culture is joy. It's when we cultivate a culture of joy in our churches. So talk maybe a little bit deeper than that, Andy.
Yeah, in that book they discuss how we learn, how our brains function, right brain, left brain. We are heavy in teaching information and passing on concepts and principles to people, while we lack the most fundamental things like joy in our lives and healthy relationships. If you stop and think in your history of going to school, some of your favorite teachers, the environment in their class was was fun. I mean, they
Mm,
made learning fun, and they also had a relationship with you where you trusted them. And also, there was probably interaction with other students in that class that you probably didn't have in similar classes. So it's the same way in church, and it's not like you have to fake any of that. But the reality is, when we are a biblical, healthy church, there's going to be great community, good relationships, but there is going to be a culture of joy and excitement about what God's doing in my life and what God's doing in my church. I told Mark earlier, had someone mention, like, hey, the last two Sundays, your sermons have just really hit home. They've been just some of the greatest sermons I've heard you preach. And my thing is, I haven't changed my approach or my delivery or my preparation for preaching any at all. But the receptivity is there because there is a sense of just overwhelming joy in our church right now. Some great things are happening. And I don't mean just big things, but I mean small things. And when that culture is present, people are more receptive, and we don't want to miss out on an opportunity to continue to foster that joy in our churches. And let me just say this, Mark, we look to hit home runs in our preaching. We look to hit home runs in our events. We set the bar so high that we think, you know, this many people have to respond and come to faith in Christ and be baptized and join our church, and this much money has to be given in our offering, or this event has to attract this many visitors, and we have to have this many church members present for it to be a success. When in fact, all of the little things you're doing by just investing in people and spending time with them and discipling them, that's where the wins are. You know, you don't have to hit a home run every time. And we have convinced ourselves if we haven't hit a home run that we failed.
Mm, that's so true. You know, it's funny you mentioned the sermon. I don't often repeat sermons, at least not verbatim. I, you know, may use part of one here and there, but I have on 2 occasions that I remember repeated a sermon because our people just needed to hear it again. And it's funny. The second time that I preached one sermon, I had the same comment. That's the best sermon I've ever heard you preach. Well, they were in the room the first time I preached it. I'm just saying. But the difference was in their own lives. And honestly, sometimes the difference is the way I deliver it. And if I say something to someone, and you know, if I tell people, hey, you know, I met with a D group this morning, and we had, you know, we have 5 in the group, and 3 showed up. If I say it just like that, that's you're going to hear one thing. If I say it like this, and those of you who are not watching, you're not going to get this, but I'm smiling now. And if I say I had a D group this morning, we got 5 and 3 showed up, you're going to receive it totally different, right? Because I'm smiling, I have joy in my face. So my delivery even is different. That's part of that cultivating that joy. So I'm just going to quote from this book that we just mentioned, just a little bit. It says, when we are the sparkle in someone's eyes, their face lights up with a smile when they see us. We feel joy when they smile. And he talks about how just that thing, you know, when we interact with people with joy on our face, it changes the way we interact. And so I think we can have a smile on our face, not a fake one, but we can have a genuine smile when we celebrate the small wins.
Mm.
And it has to happen in our hearts first. Just like Andy said, we can wait for that big thing and be, you know, Mr. Grump until then, certainly, and be all excited and then back down in the dumps, you know, 2 weeks later, because that's exactly what happens. Let's be honest. Or we can choose joy because we see God doing something in the small things, like 3 people showing up to a D group, like, you know, that conversation that we have with someone who, you know, they're not gonna walk up front in church, but that conversation is clear that, hey, they have overcome this struggle with pornography,
Mm.
you know, and we can know that, we can own it in our hearts and lives, and we can tell people, hey, you know what, lives are changing, man, and we can
Mm.
celebrate those small wins. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that, if that's okay, Andy. Let's talk about some of the small wins that maybe we miss sometimes that are worth
Oh
celebrating.
yeah. Oh yeah. I go back to student ministry. I think about a student that I was discipling. I was in a relationship with him, and he had been saved a grand total of about 3 weeks. And he came up to me in church, and he was shaking my hand. He looked me dead in the eye, and he had this big smile on his face. And I think he had just graduated high school at the time, so this was summertime. He goes, "Man, you're not gonna believe this." He said, "I only smoked 1 cigarette today." And I was like, "Dude, that is amazing. That is so awesome." Because his family, every one of them, I mean, I don't know that they weren't uh, giving their kids a bottle in one hand and a cigarette in another when they were little bitty. I mean, everybody in their family smoked. And this kid who had had this culture of just that was normal life for him realized that he needed to make a change. And instead of smoking a half a pack of cigarettes a day, he was smoking 1 cigarette a day. And I heard a
Mm,
deacon who walked by just kind of grumble, and he mentioned it to me later. He goes, "You're encouraging that kid to smoke?" I'm like, "No, I'm encouraging that kid to keep doing what he's doing, and eventually
right.
he'll be free from that, you know." So that was a small thing that I recognized early on. Don't miss out on celebrating
Mm,
small things in people's lives. If, like you mentioned earlier, I mean, If somebody just keeps showing up, that's great. If somebody's making some steady, significant changes in their life, don't neglect the fact that you can celebrate that with them and find joy in that with them. Don't ignore those small things in their life, but also in our churches. I mean, those
Mm,
small things are what build momentum.
that's right.
I mean, here at the church that I serve at right now, when I first came here a couple of years ago, the curb appeal stunk. I'm not gonna lie to you. There had been just a lack of pride in what our facilities look like. There wasn't really a whole group of people, maybe just one or two, who really cared about how things looked, and they had lost so much hope that the church could be what it should be. And we just started a movement to just improve our curb appeal and made some small changes, did some landscaping, and we resurfaced and striped our parking lot, and man, it made the outside of our church look better. And it was just small things. It took us almost a year to get all those things done, and now the church is excited about doing some work on the inside. We're in the middle of a 7-figure construction project right now in the church, and I go back to the fact that we just started trimming the bushes and cutting the grass and putting out some pine straw, and and redid our parking lot. That led to the momentum for people to be excited about a big construction project, rather than like, well, I guess we can do that, or I don't know if we can afford that, but they're excited to do that. So those small things over time that people take joy in celebrating build momentum, and it helps you accomplish the bigger things when it's time to do the bigger things.
Absolutely. And again, that's not going to happen unless we are a little bit loud
Mm,
about celebrating and finding joy in those small wins. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of discouragement in church leadership and in ministry comes because either A, we don't even notice the small wins, or B, we don't let others notice those
mm,
small wins. And
that's true.
I think you have to be loud about it. You have to share it with others. I mean, simple things like we talk about next steps a lot around here, and every next step that somebody takes, that's a small win. I'm telling you. Every time somebody fills out a next step card at our church, that's a win because they took a moment to write down something that God was putting on their heart.
Mm,
And that's God working in their heart and their life. You know, every time somebody shows up to a life group, which is our small group, right? That's a win because either they chose to show back up or they showed up for the first time. They're trying to find community. That's a
mm,
big deal. That's that's
sure
that's a
is.
win. Every time that we hear stories about somebody engaging in God's word, oh
Yeah.
man, huge win. That's not even a small win to me. That's a huge win. So,
Yeah.
but we think about those things as small. They're not big. Nobody, nobody's going to see that in a report, right? So
Hmm.
we have to share those stories. When somebody joins a church, what do? We celebrate that. When somebody gets
Hmm.
baptized, we celebrate that. But we've got to be celebrating all these other things as well. We had somebody who's been attending our church now for probably, let's see, what is this, August, for 8 months, 7.5, 8 months. And this person had not been in church in over 17 years. And they used to be in leadership in a church, right? And they went to a Christian college, but they have not been in church. And so, they've got some church hurt, all that stuff in their life, in their background. Well, they started showing up a few months ago, and they were taking small steps. At first, they wouldn't talk to anybody. They're like, I'm not a person who talks to others. So they just kind of isolated themselves. Well, what do you know? After a few weeks, they started having discussions after church with somebody. That's a win. And then eventually, this person came to our starting point, which is our membership class. Small win. We should celebrate those steps, right? And then slowly over time, writing next steps. Well, this past Sunday, this person didn't put their next step card in a bucket like normally people do. They brought their next step card to me,
Hmm.
and it said, "I'm ready to join." And this person said that they'll never join. And God had been working. So we celebrated small wins in that person's life, and we made it
Amen.
known to that person. And occasionally I would share it with our church, obviously not sharing names or specific situations like I'm doing here, so nobody knows who I'm talking about. But I would share, hey, we've got somebody that's taking a step here and celebrating those wins. I found joy in it. This person found joy in it, and now God is using this to really change their life. It's pretty
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah, that's a bunch of singles along the way instead of trying to swing for the fences and hit home runs.
That's
And
right.
that's awesome.
Station to station.
That's right. Well, I pray if you're listening or watching that the Lord will bring you great joy in knowing Christ and serving Christ in your context. That no matter how good or no matter how bad things are, that you'll have joy in seeing how God is at work in your life and through your life and around you. That you'll find joy in seeing what others need to recognize and celebrate in their own lives, and that your church will be a place of joy, so that your people would be in a place where they can better learn and be the disciples that God wants them to be. So that's what I hope, that we don't miss out, Mark, on the little things. That sure, let's enjoy those big things and let's celebrate those things, but the joy that we can find in just being consistent, the joy we can find in just seeing others make small steps in their journey to be faithful followers and disciples of Christ, may that help us, but also may that be contagious in our churches.
Absolutely. So I'm going to close, if it's okay, with a passage. I have an alarm on my phone I set a couple weeks ago at 1:31 p.m. every day. When the alarm comes on my phone, it says, excuse me, it says that Jesus alone satisfies my soul. Only Jesus, right? And it comes from Psalm 131. That's why it's set at 131. And it says, "O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised up too high." Not for those big wins, right? That's not for the things that are more important, than I am. "I don't occupy myself with things too great or too marvelous for me, but I've calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth forevermore." So our joy can only be found in the Lord. But
Amen.
when we find it in him, then we're able to celebrate these small wins that he brings. So yeah,
Amen.
absolutely. Thank you,
Amen.
Andy. Thank you guys for joining us, for watching and listening. And we do hope that you've been encouraged and equipped today to continue to lead in the local church, to celebrate those small wins, to find joy, and to make disciples, and to be a disciple. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining in. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Help us spread the word about the podcast by sharing on socials too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.